Hey everybody, welcome back to SaaS Founder Stories. My name is David Brennan, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Grin Lord, CEO and co-founder of Empathic. Welcome to the show.
To be here. Thank you.
Okay, let's start it off. Tell me about Empathic.
So Empathic started as a conversation analytics company for any type of interaction between two humans where we wanted to improve trust and empathy. Right now, we're focusing in the life science space and actually doing safety monitoring for clinical trials during the clinical trial itself and in the endpoint assessment, replacing what a human medical monitor would do in looking at how are those conversations going, what is occurring, are they meeting minimum safety requirements for the FDA, things like that. So we've kind of pivoted into this very specific vertical that is really focused on improving patient lives and helping clinical trials succeed.
That's very cool. So, can you break down your origin story and how you actually got to where you are now?
Yeah. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and like I said, we focus a lot on conversations and what's happening between two people. And that was my job, was originally training psychologists on how to listen and talk to other people. And what I learned from my trainings is that you can't teach people how to have empathy and trust and rapport in a 2 day workshop. It just like doesn't work. You have to actually have them review recordings of themselves, just like in like learning a sport, and see like what were the exact phrases, what were the behaviors you did, and how can you improve that. So I started out doing that manually, and in 2000 I was working at University of Washington, and we decided to build the first speech signal processing pipeline for healthcare data, where we actually took in recordings, had human annotators say these are all the good and bad things that happened. There were psychologists that did that, and then we fed that into a machine learning model. All of this, was years of development, like 9 years. This is before, speech recognition systems like AWS Transcribe, for example, like didn't exist. So we had to, build every little piece of that pipeline. But we did that, and it took like, 6 or 7 hours to process a single hour of video. But we could look at a conversation and say, this clinician or therapist, this is what they did. Here's how they can improve. And we kind of did an automated coach for that. So that spun out, became my first startup in 2017. And then since then, I've been in the conversation analytics space. I worked for another company called Uper, which was a therapy chatbot, and then founded Empathic when I learned, through these other companies that you could actually automatically detect these things in real time and give people tips and suggestions on how to improve. So Empathic actually started as an API where we just sold to other people and said, hey, we can infuse empathy into any conversation. But one of the use cases we found really worked was, again, saving people's lives, looking at how are these medical conversations going. So empathy can be very important, accurate understanding in medical contexts. So that was our first model. Now we have, I don't actually know the number, but I think it's over 200 different models of human behavior where we're looking at, again, what is happening in that conversation? Are those patients being consented? Is there bias being introduced? As well as how are those people relating?
It's very cool. Um, and so prior to us recording, you were telling me a little bit about some of the challenges that you guys have been working through. And the one that you wanted to kind of unpack for us was how you found product market fit. And I thought this was so interesting because you found product market fit in an industry or a segment where the TAM wasn't really large enough to be venture backed. And I, of course, explained to you my experience in this. So I'm really excited for you to unpack this for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say it wasn't large enough to be venture backed. It definitely is a big TAM. It's like a $6 billion TAM. It's just that, VCs want to see huge multiples of return, and 6 billion is considered small for a TAM. So, a lot of companies would be very excited about that. But like you said, the venture scale is different.
Different game.
Um, it is, yeah. So when we started Empathic, we sold very horizontally. So anyone could insert our tips and corrections, detections into any product. We actually sold into sales, insurance, HR, trying to think of some of our earlier customers. And again, in the medical space, we looked at like coaching in healthcare, in therapy, and then finally in life sciences in the clinical trial space. So we had this broad applicability. So again, the TAM there is massive. Who can't use conversation analytics? But I think that the problem when you have such a horizontal product is that, especially, sorry, I should put this in context. We founded the company in 2021. So this is pre-Chat GPT and OpenAI. So the conversation analytics space was very different then. And people could sell a simple API that did speech transcription and said like what's happening in the conversation for a very different price. That technology hadn't been commoditized as it was as soon as essentially ChatGPT came out. So we had all sorts of different customers and markets. No one was building their own stuff. And again, the TAM was like, where couldn't you use this? Like, what conversation couldn't be? But then, the problem became, and again, I was like an early founder, you can't literally sell into every market. It's very hard, especially when you're doing top down B2B sales and you're not product led. So you have to make, special materials for the sales folks, for the HR folks, for the insurance. It was like we had to pick a lane and stick to it to grow. So we looked at all of those, and the lane that seemed to be, I think it had the deepest moat in terms of all of our models had to be clinically validated by psychologists and doctors was in this life science space because they had to be very accurate. So you couldn't just take something off the shelf and say, this is good enough. Like, okay, let's take Gong, for example. You can insert a sentiment analysis and say, conversation's going good. And people be like, okay, yeah, I like this. Like, what a great tool. For medical settings, you can't be like, conversation's good, don't know why, but like good words were used. Or in this medical conversation, you're talking about a traumatic accident and they're like, bad words are being used, conversation bad, like that's not useful. So it needs to be very attuned and specific. And we found that was like our mode is like, okay, we actually understand the behaviors going on in these clinical conversations. Let's go there. And our first adoption was in the psychedelic medicine space where a given patient in a clinical trial can have, I might quote this wrong, but something like 50 hours of recording that need to be reviewed by humans. There's an FDA recommendation that says you have to have either someone in the room or a central rater that reviews those recordings and says, was this trial conducted to fidelity to the protocol? And what we found was only 10% of recordings could be reviewed in trials because it was just frankly physically impossible to have humans review that many recordings for an entire trial. And also humans fatigue. It's not a great task for humans to do, to listen to 50 hours of recordings, have a human doctor that should be treating patients, like looking and listening to this and saying, oh, is this okay? So great task for AI. So that's where we found product market fit, was in the psychedelic medicine space and in mental health trials. Again, that's a $6 billion TAM, which is a lot smaller than what we needed it to be. So our challenge like this year and going into I guess last year, now going into this year, is like, now that we found that, what's our next step for market penetration? And do we need to do more build and like make a new product or new features? And where we're at right now is, yes, we've decided to do that and to expand into endpoint assessment, which is like how they detect if a trial is working or not, is in the endpoints. We found out that there's a set of assessments that are used that are conducted by humans and also have a manual review process. So we try to go anywhere where there's long recordings, where humans fatigue. So we're expanding into that. But that's been a hard problem, and one that as a founder, you get so excited about product market fit. Like, oh my God, I've got repeating sales. This is working. Everything's taking off. And then you're like, oh, wait, this isn't as big as it needs to be to go where we need to go. So that's a new challenge for us.
That's really interesting because I think, first of all, congratulations on finding product market fit because most software companies don't ever. And I think that's a pretty big milestone. So that's well
Yeah,
worth
thank you.
celebrating. How did you move? Because it makes perfect sense to me to like find a similar use case in the chain or in that area that you're working. How did you find that next expansion point for the product?
Yeah, actually, so my co-founder, Danielle, she has a lot of experience in pharma and life sciences. And I think it came actually from a customer. that Danielle and I were working with, and he was like, "Yeah, we could use this for the trial, but you know where we could really use it for would be in reviewing and scoring our endpoint assessments." And that kind of light bulb moment went off. And then Danielle went and validated that with a lot of larger life science and pharma companies and found out that endpoint administration, there's actually this really interesting case study with Paxil where the variability in raters for this trial led to the treatment having no effect. There was no difference between the control and intervention because the raters themselves were like, yeah, I think this person is anxious, or I think this person's depressed, and on a scale of 0 to 5, I'm going to put it at a 3, and the other person's putting it at a 1. And that discrepancy in the rating led to the trial having no effect. So we kind of started to realize, like, oh my gosh, there's this place where humans are being used to do a standardized assessment. They're doing it very variably. And there is not the capacity to have oversight over all those humans because of the length of the recordings, the amount of time. So it was like almost exact same problem as our clinical trial. And we kind of just pulled the thread on that and realized, oh my gosh, this isn't just in mental health studies and in psychedelic studies. Anyone using a structured clinical interview as their endpoint could be in a cancer trial. Is this person getting depressed or suicidal on this treatment? They use these same structured clinical interviews. So we kind of opened up this space and now are introducing the first automated solution for oversight. We're not doing the assessments or replacing humans themselves. Again, we're always like looking at how humans are performing so people can go in and like adjust that. But it's giving, folks the ability to save their trial or understand while it's going on that, like, okay, we have one rater here that's being totally deviant and variable and is not hitting inter-rater reliability. We're seeing that in real time. Like, let's replace that or make an adjustment or throw this data out. So again, like really similar use case, but yeah, we had to listen to the customer. We had to kind of have the connections to the right people to know how big is this problem. And then we kind of hit that realization of every, pharmaceutical company that has a trial where there's humans being used on the endpoints needs to have some oversight and, guarantee of reliability in that.
Do you see in the future, I won't say replacing, but replacing the task of like reviewing the whole actual interview
Oh yeah, we
with
already,
AI for
that's,
consistency?
that's,
Because that's one of
that's
the
what we're
biggest
doing.
problems we see is like the human. There's jobs that people are
That's our
really good
role.
for, right? And yeah, sorry about that. What was that?
No, no, I'm saying that's exactly our use case is replacing the reviewer. So whoever's like the quality assurance, it's similar to like cybersecurity. You don't want someone like manually checking your logs. You want a AI to do that. So we're kind of doing that for audio and video recordings in the pharmaceutical space and kind of following the scent of where are there large manual human tasks where humans are variable or they're bored or they just like simply don't have the capacity to do this. It's a great use case for AI. And like anyone that's like, oh no, AI is replacing doctors. It's like doctors can't even do this. Like we don't have enough of them to do this. Like this is better for the consumer is to take AI built with the insight of thousands of doctors, with less bias, less variability, and doing something that, we want these skilled clinicians out treating patients, not reviewing video and audio tapes for 9,000 hours. I mean, it's yeah, again, like perfect use case, but it's been
They
a
don't
hard
want to be
thing.
doing it either, I bet you.
No.
Like that's the
Well,
part that people don't understand is you find me one person that just wants to sit there and listen to a recording so they can jot down, oh yeah, you know what I mean? Like that is about as fulfilling a job as you could ever not want to have.
well, I mean, you definitely are, yeah, preaching to the choir because to build these models at Empathic, that's what we had to do. Our humans had to do this. So, like, we employed at one point 30 psychologists, that is what they were doing. And now we've been able to build so many models and large language models that can help us with parts of that annotation that we've reduced our team to a small number of domain experts that can validate, but we still use a lot of humans because that's what it takes to build this AI. So yeah, we have just an amazing, we called them the core. The core is like their name because they are the core of the company are these domain experts. And I'm sure you've heard this phrase, but like, you know, I don't know if it's 2025 or 2026 is going to be like the year of the domain expert, because eventually, that's all that's left is expert knowledge to be automated. You don't need AI to be doing other things. So these experts are super valuable. And yes, they have to do that at Empathic and they hate it. And yeah, it's not fun. And we have a whole protocol around retaining them and making sure that they're feeling valued. And it's hard work.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. And I always like to close the podcast with us giving back. So, what's one thing I can or our listeners can help you with over the next little while?
I think, given what we just talked about and finding product market fit and new markets, I mean, if listeners can think of places, particularly in life sciences and pharmaceuticals, where there are recordings of audio or video that you need help reviewing with AI or speeding that process, even if it's not replacement, like we have the system, we can help. We are clinicians and we're building this for other clinicians, and would love to hear of those use cases or connections to customers, or yeah, if there's any way that we can help you in those roles, like that is always welcome.
Perfect. Well, we'll put it out there. I've got a few people that jump to mind that I'd like to introduce you to. So,
Awesome. Cool.
thank you very much for coming on the show, and I can't wait
Thank
to
you.
follow your journey.
Thanks so much, David. Take care.